Coming up on today's Locked On NHL, an Eastern Conference edition of the show, we have a trade between Atlantic Division teams. Jeff Petry is moving addresses for the second time this offseason. We'll also discuss David Krejci retiring, and Mikey's got some NHL All-Star Game improvements we'll get to, all coming up on the Locked On NHL podcast. It's your team every day.
You're Locked On NHL, your daily podcast on the National Hockey League. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome back to this week's Eastern Conference edition of the Locked On NHL podcast. I'm Ross Levitan. You can find me 5 days a week over at Locked On Senators. And as always, it's a Battle of Ontario edition. I'm joined by Mike DiStefano from Locked On Leafs. Mike, it's been a little while with coinciding vacations back to back. Great to be on with you today.
I was going to say, you said, as always. I'm like, God, I don't think we've done a podcast together in a month. It's been a while. Like, I was away for 3 weeks, and then, you came back, or I came back, and then you're in wedding mode, and this is your first Locked On NHL show as a married man. How's it feel?
Feeling a little heavier. I got the little gold band on, and feels the same. It's not too different, but had a great celebration over the weekend, and almost got duped by one of those fake insider accounts on Twitter.
What happened?
I just knew that Shane Pinto was going to end up signing on my wedding day. There had to be something there. So I go and just a smaller account had the Kevin Weeks photo where he's, he always does that pose when he's breaking news, and, changed his username to Kevin Weeks and had this tweet saying, I'm hearing that Shane Pinto is about to agree. So quick little panic scroll in the washroom there. Family's wondering, hey, we got more photos to take. Trying to figure it out. And no, Shane Pinto is not signed. Mike, few RFAs haven't signed. Anaheim has two to take care of. Jamie Drysdale and Trevor Zegras, both still left on side. The Eastern Conference, as we mentioned, what we cover here every Wednesday. I mentioned Shane Pinto. Ottawa's got Igor Sokolov to take care of. But we saw an RFA get paid last week, and this week his team has a hole to fill at center. We're talking Jeremy Swayman getting his contract through an arbitrator, and then David Krejci officially announcing his retirement. Kind of seemed like it was just when, not if. But your thoughts on what Boston does now without Patrice Bergeron, and you can get into a little bit too of the legacy that David Krejci leaves behind.
Yeah, I think you look at Krejci, and he was a hell of a Bruin, hell of a career, one of the more underrated players throughout his time in the NHL. But he was always a very reliable, dependable number 2 center in behind Bergeron. The reason why that team was always so competitive and always in the ranks to potentially win a Stanley Cup. They went on, 2 cup runs, and they ended up winning a Stanley Cup with those two down the middle. So, and it's because, again, like this, they were so good as the 1 and 2. Now it helped them together. I mean, the problem is I always look at the Boston Bruins, and I feel like every year I say to myself, they got to take a step back at some point. They got to take a step back at some point. Now you really have to believe that, though, right? Like, now, with Bergeron completely gone, he's retired, and he'll be in the Hall of Fame someday. And now you look, and David Krejci announced his retirement this week. You're looking at a center group of Pavel Zacha, Charlie Coyle, Morgan Geekie, and as of now, Jesper Boqvist is penciled in as the fourth-line center. I believe they actually – don't they have or maybe Trent Frederick, I guess, could end up coming in and filling one of those roles. But either way, I just don't see it happening where this team can really look themselves in the mirror anymore and still say we're cup caliber teams. Like I just, those are 2 massive hits to this group. I just don't see them being Stanley Cup contenders anymore.
And I understand they had to make certain decisions, but others I'm still scratching my head about. Most notably, like, maybe this is a hot take, but we did see the Norris Trophy winner get traded. Like, if I was Boston, I would have really tried to strike on the Linus Ullmark market. He's making $5 million for the next 2 seasons. Swayman with a 1-year deal too. Now he's setting himself up with, maybe without the opportunity, it won't be as easy to demand more, but he had a great season. And really the Bruins record didn't, not that they still have the same talent up front, like you said, but I would have looked to have moved him because what they ended up having to have was Taylor Hall was the odd man out, $6 million. Really played well last year, I thought. And you're replacing him essentially with James Van Riemsdyk or Milan Lucic. And I get it. Like the two of them are making a third of what Taylor Hall makes. But at the same time, like they're going to be expected to play a top 6 role, at least one of them, right? It's probably going to be JVR, I would suspect, out of the two of them.
Yeah, there's no chance that Lucic is going to be anything more than a fourth liner who might get you, 8 to 10 goals tops. Like that's what he is at this point in his career. And even JVR, like he's a guy who's slowed down now. He's into his mid-30s. Like I don't think JVR is a guy who I look at and say, hey, he's the replacement of a former league MVP. Like he might only get you 15, maybe 20 goals just because he's so good in around the net and he could just kind of bang his way and find some goals on the power play. But yeah, like they just lost so much with those players. And, there's still an opportunity, I suppose, where they could get better. There's a lot of names that are out there as potential trade partners. Like we know that there's been conversations out in Winnipeg about them maybe taking a step back. Does Mark Scheifele become available? Are they interested in bringing him into the fold? Potentially Elias Lindholm could be available as well out in Calgary. That would be a nice pickup for them to try and help their center depth and just, become a better team. So there's still time for this team to, get better. But as the lineup currently stands right now, they lost a lot. They didn't really add anything of significant impact this offseason. They lost Tyler Bertuzzi too, who they gave up, a strong package to get the deadline, and he ends up walking and coming to Toronto, and they didn't replace him either. So there's a lot that they just have not been able to replace. I don't see this team being nearly as good as they were a season. I mean, clearly they're going to have to take a step back. They quite literally set records last year as the greatest regular season of all time in terms of wins and points. I don't think they're going to come anywhere near that. I think there's a team that's going to be fighting for a playoff spot, let alone being in cup contender status.
They still have a great decor, though, man. That top pair of Hampus Lindholm and Charlie McAvoy are as good as any top pair in the National Hockey League. I like what Matt Grzelcyk brings as a middle option on defense. Brandon Carlo will need to play his best, too, on the right side. But that is a top 4. Like, I still think it's fine with some guys who can mix in. Kevin Shattenkirk has the experience. Derek Forbert's been a guy who they relied on a lot last year. But it's just up front where you lose your 2 top centermen. I don't know how many teams can sustain their success after that. I've heard on good authority Morgan Geekie is going to be expected. At least Jim Montgomery kind of sold him on the idea that he was going to get a real opportunity to be more than he has had a chance to show at the NHL level. He signed a 2-year deal at $2 million. I think he could be, a real nice player.
I like Geekie. I think he is a good player. Like when he was in Carolina, and then when he ended up getting selected by Seattle, I liked him in the role that he was in. We'll see in a bigger role. I mean, how much of it? Like, I don't expect for him to be David Krejci. Like, if that's what they're expecting him to come in and be, like a top 6 contributor, that may be a little bit of a stretch for me. But, as a top 9 contributor, a guy who can play some 3C and, maybe get some special teams opportunities, perhaps. But for him to come in and replace anything that was lost, I just don't see that happening.
Who do you have ahead of the other right now between the Florida Panthers and Boston Bruins? Because I still think Tampa and Toronto, they're pretty much locked in the top 3 spots. Like, out of those 2 teams, who do you think it has the inside edge?
I would probably... You want to hear a hot take?
Sure.
Neither.
Ottawa.
Buffalo.
I
think the Buffalo Sabres, if I had to put money on... Now, I think all 4 of these teams that we just mentioned, Buffalo, Ottawa, Florida, and Boston, I think Detroit's just a step below that, in my opinion.
We'll get
and then obviously, and then obviously Montreal, behind them. But those 4 teams, I think, are really in that mix where one of them will get a divisional spot, and then the other 2 will be fighting with the Metro for the wild card positions. If I had to place a wager on it today, I think I'd put it as the Buffalo Sabres finishing at the top between those 4 teams. I like what they're building in Buffalo. I think Rasmus Dahlin took his step next year. They got Devin Levi into the fold. We'll see if he can provide some stable goaltending for them. There's still an opportunity for them to go out and address goaltending. Potentially Connor Hellebuck or someone could become available for them to go and get. Jacob Markstrom maybe if the Flames are looking to rebuild and retool a little bit. But I like the other pieces, Tage Thompson, Alex Tuck, Dylan Cousins obviously is a really good player. JJ Peterka, I think, is going to take a step. Jack Quinn, there's so many good pieces there. And Owen Power is another guy on the blue line who I really like. Matthias Samuelsson is a terrific shutdown defender, young kid. So they've got some nice pieces over in Buffalo. So I actually think that's the team out of that group of 4 that I believe will finish in 3rd place in the Atlantic Division.
Okay. I mean, that's a lot to ask out of Devin Levi. I know that the numbers are exquisite everywhere he's been, but damn, 21 years old, and you're expecting a potential divisional playoff caliber team to get what? 50, 55 games out of them if they're going to be successful. I don't know if Ukko-Pekka Luukkonen and Eric Comrie are necessarily household names just yet. I think that's a ton to put on the kid's shoulders. And I think Buffalo missed an opportunity to bring in Connor Hellebuck during the early stage of the offseason. I think he was a perfect fit in there for him, and they have the assets. They wouldn't have even blinked if they would have missed out the 2 Winnipeg Ice kids that they have in their system just seems like natural, conversation starters, Zach Benson, Matthew Savoy. Without them, they still have a stacked prospect pool. I don't know what Winnipeg was asking for. The Dubois trade kind of showed that they're looking as much to retool as rebuild, bringing in 2 middle 6 NHL options in that trade. But if they were interested in prospects, I think Buffalo, New Jersey, I think they're a bit different. I think Buffalo, to me, was the number 1 spot for Connor Hellebuck. I think it's a shame they missed out. Huge Devin Levi fan, but I just think that's a huge ask for a 21-year-old.
It is, for sure. And, he's going to obviously have help. It's going to have to be a tandem. I don't expect Devin Levi to play 50, 60 games. That's just not reasonable for a guy who's never done anything like that coming from the college ranks. But I still think that, they were 1 point away from making the playoffs last year. 1 point. You look at the growth of what everyone, of everyone on that team that's young, that's still taking steps forward in their career. Plus, you add a better goaltender in Devin Levi, and hopefully, Ukko-Pekka Luukkonen could take a little bit more of a step this year. They did make an addition. I can't remember who they added to the blue line, but I thought they made an addition to the blue line.
Eric Johnson's coming in from Colorado.
Eric Johnson. Yeah, Eric Johnson's going to be Eric Johnson. But I still think that they're a decent squad. Connor Clifton, that's who they brought in, actually. They brought in Connor Clifton to kind of add a little bit of help to their blue line. So I think they're decent. I think the Buffalo Sabres, I think they're going to show some people that they're for real this year.
Okay, we'll find out. How about the other 2 teams mentioned there? Montreal and Detroit, they combined to make an NHL trade in a mid-August deal. We'll let you know the details of that and how it affects the hierarchy in the Atlantic Division. Are the Habs making a push for another top 5 pick? That's all next. You're listening to Locked On NHL. Today's episode is brought to you by the FanDuel Sportsbook. We love our friends at FanDuel. It's the official sportsbook of the Locked On Podcast Network. Over at FanDuel, you can get set with futures for the National Hockey League, playoff over-unders, projected stats for Connor Bedard, and other stars. It's all right now at FanDuel. Football season's about to kick off as well, and when you bet on a Super Bowl winner, you can get bonus bets every time they win in the regular season. Just pick any team to win the Super Bowl, and you'll get bonus bets. You can use your bonus bets on spreads, player props, over-unders, and more. Visit FanDuel.com/lockedon and start earning bonus bets with America's #1 sportsbook. That's FanDuel.com/lockedon. Take some time to visit FanDuel and check out all their great odds today. Welcome back to the Locked On NHL podcast. Every Wednesday, we cover the Eastern Conference top to bottom. And bottom is where you could have found these 2 teams in the Atlantic Division last year. The Montreal Canadiens have traded Jeff Petry. Yes, the one they just acquired in the three-way trade for Erik Karlsson. With that, they will be maintaining some of the money. So they are sending not only Jeff Petry, but Jeff Petry at, I think, 37% of what his initial salary was for this season to the Detroit Red Wings in exchange for a 4th-round pick and defensive prospect Gustav, no, not that, Lidstrom. Your thoughts on the trade, Mike, and how does Jeff Petry impact what the Detroit Red Wings can expect from themselves next year?
Yeah, I mean, like, I think it's a good deal just because of how cheap Jeff Petry's coming in, right? And he's a veteran blue liner who can come in and kind of help that young decor who struggled mightily last year. I'm not saying that he's going to come in and be a rock star and be the Jeff Petry that he was 2-3 years ago. I think his game has fallen off. He's, into his mid-30s at this point. But to get him at, what'd you say, 37.5% of what his cap hit is, so what, like $2 million, just a shade under that. I think that's a terrific pickup for the Detroit Red Wings. Whether or not that moves the needle, probably not. But it does give this team a solid veteran blue liner who's has wanted to get to Detroit for quite some time now. I remember last summer there was the rumor was Jeff Petry wanted to go to Detroit. Didn't happen. He ended up getting traded, but went to Pittsburgh. This offseason, he finally lands there. And, I'm sure he's going to he's going to give you the value of what his contract is, but I don't think it's going to do much in terms of standings wise or if it makes me feel any different about this team.
$2.343750 million. So $2.34 million for Jeff Petry. He's 35 years old, not only for this year, but next year as well. What really kind of opened my eyes was looking at Detroit's cap friendly and seeing that salary is the 6th highest among Red Wings defensemen for next year. And that doesn't include their best defenseman, Moritz Seider, who's still on the final year of his entry-level contract. They have Ben Sherratt for 3 more seasons at 4.75. Shane Gostisbehere 1 season at 4.125. Justin Hall 3 years at 3.4. Jake Wallman 3 years at 3.4. Olli Mata 2 years at $3 million. Not only that, but the top 4 I mentioned, Sherratt, Gostisbehere, Hall, and Wallman all have modified no trade clauses. So does Jeff Petry, who's a Michigan native, whose dad actually pitched for the Detroit Tigers. I don't.
Why do any of those players
have no trade clauses?
No trade clauses. Like, are they is John Ferguson Jr. at this point the GM of the Detroit? Wow.
Yeah, and up front. Wow. Dylan Larkin has a full no trade clause, and then they have Andrew Kopp, JT Tomfer, and David Perron, all with modified no trades.
I gotta tell you, like, Steve Yzerman is a wizard when it comes to trading, but when it comes to, like, they gotta take his phone away July 1 because this is 2 seasons in a row that he's made some questionable signings on July 1. Like Justin Hall, and JT Compher, those signings he made this year were very questionable deals. And now you're bringing Jeff Petry into the fold. I mean, what this might also signal, and you brought this up, so I'll give you the credit for it. So I want you to talk about it. Like, does this maybe say something about the defensive prospects that they have in their system and Stevie Y thinking maybe they're not quite ready yet, and that's why they're bringing in all these veterans?
Yeah, I think that, or maybe he's remembering how Detroit used to be almost notorious until you saw them in the NHL of
over-ripening
prospects in the minors for an over-ripening. Because if you talk to any Red Wings fan, Seaman Edvinsson is like the next big thing. He was a top, I think, 6th overall pick. If it's Detroit, I'm just going to assume it was 6th overall. That's where they always end up in the draft lottery. Seider, Zadina, Edvinsson, just to name a couple here recently. But, William Wallander as well, like Emil Vero and Albert Johansson. Like, just all these guys, they're 22 and under. But to me, it's probably signaling that we're going to see Edvinsson play another season in the AHL where he was really effective. I mean, 27 points in 52 games and getting used to the North American game. Probably want to cut down from 52 PIMs in 52 games, and struggled in the NHL on a bad team. Like, they were not good, especially at the end of the year. He got his 9 games -7 and 12 penalty minutes, 2 goals, no assists. But I still think he's going to be a real good defenseman. I just think, yeah, maybe Detroit's going the extra patient route. They clearly are still in building mode with 2 first-round picks last draft. I think they did really well with how they used those picks, but with Axel Sandy and Palika as well, another defensive prospect, but he's a couple of years away. And then Nate Danielson at 9th overall. I almost would have flipped where those guys went, but by all accounts, Nate Danielson does have maybe a more intricate toolkit than I initially thought watching him through the process. So with all that said, Mikey, I still think Detroit's a step behind in terms of the teams we mentioned before. I know they're fans and Sens fans of having a mid-off all off season, kind of going back and forth. But I think probably Steve Yzerman doesn't mind that necessarily. Where I question him is not allowing himself the flexibility in the years ahead, because they're going to have to re-sign Lucas Raymond. They're going to have to re-sign Moritz Seider. And now they're taking on like that second year of Jeff Petry's contract at 36, 37. Like, I know they're not a cap team, but 2.4 that could be used, I think, a little wiser with what they have.
Well, I think you just look up and down the lineup and a lot of the deals that they've made over the last couple of years. Like I was saying earlier, like take this guy's phone away on July 1, because why you're paying a 28-year-old JT Comp for $5.1 million for the next 5 years is a big question mark to me. You're giving Andrew Kopp, who's already 29 years old, could be 30 years old next year. He's making $5.625 for the next 4 years. Like, there's just a lot of money being paid to some older guys who just simply aren't going to be part of this future when those young players are ready to go, like Ben Sherratt, Justin Hall, those guys together making over $8 million between those two. Like, we're talking about third pair defensemen here with these two players for the next 3 years, making up $8 million of your team's cap. And if you're not going to be competitive, instead of spending it on third pair defensemen, do kind of what you did here with Petry, I guess, or what you potentially could do with other teams. Act as a broker. Basically what Montreal just did in this deal. Act as a broker, take on picks, take on prospects, and use your salary cap that way. If you're going to suck, just flat out suck. Like, what's the point in coming in 27th and picking 6th again? You know what I mean? Like, come in 30th and pick in the top 3. And then, get a really solid prospect and then build your team that way. It just, the way that they're doing it in Detroit, to me, is just a little questionable. I don't know if it's a directive from ownership that they have to remain competitive, but the way that they're building this thing, I just think that there's a smarter way to go about it, if I'm being honest.
I mean, Wings fans won't let me live it down if we don't mention they did add Alex DeBrincat up front, so that's obviously going to help them put more pucks in the net. They gave away one of their 2 first-round picks for next season, so they still have a pick in the 1st, 2nd, 3rd, and 4th. I actually have a pick in every round so far next draft, despite adding a talented player this summer. All right, we've got some all-star ideas coming up after the break. We will discuss. And by the way, Montreal, just to finish my tease from before, like, they're just setting themselves up to be close to the cap, but stack up assets for the future. That's where they're.
Where that pick wise?
I know they had a lot of picks in the last 2 drafts specifically, and I guess the jury's still out on them. They have a first, they have Colorado's 2nd, but not their own next year. And then they have 2 third-round picks as well, 3 7th. So stay tuned to the end of the draft if you're a Habs fan. But in 2025, they have Calgary's first from the Sean Monahan trade, which was a great pickup for them. Unfortunately, Sean Monahan was injured, which, I mean, it was kind of always the risk with him last season. But
re-signed there, didn't he?
What's that?
He ended up re-signing, though, again, didn't he?
Yeah,
he's still there.
He has 17 points in 25 games last year.
Yeah, he got off to a good start. Hopefully he can, stay relatively healthy this year.
Only 28 years old, man. That's tough because, I mean, he looked like a budding star when he was playing with Johnny Gaudreau there in Calgary. So, all right, all that to say, we have some all-star ideas. That's next. You're looking at Locked On NHL. All right, welcome back to the Wednesday, August 16th edition of Locked On NHL. I'm Ross Levitan alongside Mike DiStefano. A reminder that we have local experts on the biggest stories where your team every day on the Locked On NHL Network. The NHL All-Star Game is coming to Toronto this upcoming season. No longer will players be able to pack their flip-flops and beach shirts. They will have to trade it in for some gritty Canadian winter wear. But Mike, how are they going to make it as exciting as possible inside the formerly Air Canada Center?
I think there's a few ways that you can make this a way more entertaining experience. And it's not even like this is new revolutionary stuff. Really, it's just things that we've seen from the NHL in the past that they've gone away from, that like us fans, you and I, want it back essentially. And also taking a little bit from other sports and what they do and what's considered successful in their all-star festivities. So I've got like a 3-pack of things that the NHL could do to improve all-star weekend and the viewing experience at home. Because I think when you're there, and hopefully I get to go this year being in Toronto, I'd like to, at least try and see if I can get a chance to go to the skills comp. It apparently is very much, it's not for TV. It's more so for the people who are there potentially, or it's a different experience when you're there, and it's much more enjoyable. There's a lot of other stuff going on than just what's seen on television. So I think a way that you can improve it TV wise for the TV experience is do these 3 things. So first and foremost, can we bring back the draft? Like I'm done with the divisional tournament. Let's bring back a draft and let's get this thing back to the way that it was played. I don't want 3-on-3 anymore. Like I'm okay with going back to 5-on-5. That may be controversial. I don't know how you feel about that. But if that means that we can get a draft back and we can draft 2 teams and have them go at it and get, just have the game back, where we can get some representation for defensemen who have been criminally left off of so many all-star teams. We had one team this year that didn't even have a defenseman on their entire all-star team. Like, it was ridiculous. So that's one thing that I think could improve it. Bring back the draft, because that was so much fun. Like, remember Phil Kessel going last and everyone's clowning on him. Like, it's a lot of fun to experience. Like, I remember watching it with buddies, grabbing a pizza when I was in high school and just watching the draft and having fun. Let's get back to that. It was a fun experience.
The draft was the best. I actually went to it in 2012 when it was in Ottawa. That's where I got that plate. I was working at a restaurant downtown Ottawa, and a group of the players, including Erik Karlsson, walked in. I was like, man, got to get him to sign something. This kid's 21 years old, putting the league in a blender. So I just grabbed the plate off the line and got him to rip a signature.
That's what that is? That's a plate?
I'll grab it.
Like a porcelain plate.
I've just got it leaning up. So, yeah, I'll pull it on here. So, Erik Karlsson. And then I wrote on the back there just where it was signed. Year he won his first Norris Trophy, All-Star Weekend, Jan 27, 2012. Guy, 81 games, 78 points, 21 years old, absolute stud. So, yeah, like that, like you're saying, like the festivities are more what goes on in town around the All-Star game than the actual event. But that draft was hilarious. And you can actually watch the entire TSN broadcast on YouTube. James Duth, the Ottawa native, was doing it. Alfredson, of course, it was expected to be a swan song, and then he ends up playing great the next season. Nobody cares what happens the season after that. Nobody needs to know or care what happened the season after that. But it was kind of a celebration for him. Former Senator Zdeno Chara was the captain of the other team. He had just won the Stanley Cup with the Boston Bruins the summer before. Marian Hossa was there. There's just so many all-stars. And at the casino, it's in this auditorium room, and everyone was in one. Like there was not a dry pallet in the house. It was an unbelievable event and, intimate setting. The players can obviously hear you. Everyone was giving it to Kessel, who had been picked last the year before, and it was and obviously Kessel was playing in Toronto at the time. Lupul was a part of Team Chara right away. Just like you got to get the rivalries going. I thought they did a good job of that. And then I think you were telling me that's the last year they did it. So it's been almost 10 years now without it. So to hell with all their feelings about being the last guy picked, whatever it may be.
Dude, they got a car out of it. Like, who cares? You get a car out of it. It's all jokes anyway. Remember then Ovi, like that, I believe it probably was either that year. Maybe there's one more year of it. But Ovi got pissed when he got selected because he won the car. Or the truck, or whatever the hell they gave him. Like, he legitimately was like, no, don't pick me, because he didn't want to get picked. So it turned into a bit of a meme, I suppose, and maybe that's why the NHL decided to go away from it. But from as a fan, from a viewing experience, I thought that it was fun. And the NBA does it, like they do it to today, like, and it's always a big money grab on ESPN. People watch it. So why the TV networks wouldn't want to do this also blows my mind.
Random aside, who leads the NHL in all-star game points?
Like all time or in one game?
All time.
So this would be a random player?
No, just a random stat. I don't think anyone cares.
Oh, I mean, Gretzky probably scored a whole bunch of points in all-star games.
When there's an NHL record that's being questioned, just say Gretzky. You're most likely going to be right.
Is it Gretzky?
Yeah.
Yeah, okay.
It's Gretzky.
You said it as if it was going to be a trick question. I was going to be like, Roenick?
Points per game, though, it's Mario. Mario had 23 points in 10 all-star games, which is 2 less than Gretzky, but Gretzky played in 8 more. Amazing. And I'm not going to make you guess this, but Gordie Howe played the most all-star games. He was an all-star 23 times.
Wow.
23 times.
Yeah.
Amazing. Amazing. All right. I like that, Mikey. You want to give us the other ones quickly? We just got a couple more minutes here.
Yeah, I think one other one that I've petitioned for a while now is to also allow like skilled players to participate in the skills competition, right? Like I think if you allowed guys who are like trickster, like trick shot artists to take place in the shootout, I think it would be much more entertaining than what we see nowadays because they just would be able to do cooler things. I think if you have the actual hardest shot out there, as opposed to like who won it last year? I'm trying to think. Didn't Pettersson win it last year? Like at like 88 miles an hour or something silly like that.
Yeah, it's
like it was ridiculous who we had competing in the hardest shot competition. Like the days of Chara versus Weber are gone. I get that, but there's got to be someone else in the NHL who at least has a bomb, a clapper who you can put out there just to say, hey, he's got the hardest shot in the NHL, not this guy who happens to be an all-star, and we just decided to throw him in this random event.
It was Pettersson that won, but put some respect on his name. The guy went 103.2.
Nah. Did he have that? Was it that hard of a shot?
You had him in the 80s.
I could have sworn it was like a lower shot than that. Was it really that high?
103.2. Rasmus Dahlin was second, 102.3. Josh Morrissey, 96.7. Alex Ovechkin, 95.1. And Seth Jones, 94.7.
Still, you're going to tell me that there's not guys in the NHL that consistently can get over 100?
Yeah, Pettersson was the only player who clocked over 100 on both his attempts.
Yeah. I should have known that, being a big fan of Pettersson, but like I remember him winning. I thought it was lower than that. But anyways, my point still stands. You should get guys like fastest skater competitions, like whoever the fastest, like Andreas Athanasiou is one of the fastest skaters in the NHL. Like get those guys there just for the events. You know what I mean? Like the NBA does this with the 3-point competition and the dunk competitions. It's okay. If you're a specialist, let them go. If you are a dunk, big dunk artist, okay, let them go and just do that, participate that. I think that would be better than having these guys just participate just because they need to do something in the All-Star game. I don't think everyone has to do an event. I don't. You're there for the game. Let the skills competition be its own little thing with different players.
Let us know what you think should be the changes made to the All-Star game, your thoughts on the Jeff Petry trade, and more on Locked On NHL or wherever you find your podcast. You can also find us in the comment section on YouTube at Locked On NHL. For Mike DiStefano, I'm Ross Levitan, and this has been your weekly Eastern Conference roundup on the Locked On NHL podcast. It's your team every day.